Good morning. We'll be starting up here in about, minute and a half. While you're waiting, you can go ahead and set up for poll EV. We'll be using that to ask questions. You could open up your Q&A to put your questions in and make sure everything's working. Get your cup of coffee. We also recommend, even though you can't type into the chat, we do recommend you open the chat up, because once we start, we'll be putting links in there on the handout and links to the polls and things like that. Okay, it's 7, but we'll give folks another 30 seconds or so to finish logging in. As we know, sometimes there's challenges with that, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. Okay, so good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started on our session on traffic safety. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the New York State LTAP Center. This is one of our foundational webinars. Here's the list of the next ones that are coming up. Next week, we have one on complete streets. That one, by the way, has now been upgraded to be worthy of a PDH for professional development hours for engineers, but still, like all of our webinars, are useful for everybody. There's something you can pick up. And we'll obviously have these running all winter long, except for breaks around the holidays and when other organizations are meeting and things like that. We'll be doing these till the end of February into early March. Again, if you haven't been on one of these webinars before, your audio settings are down in the lower left. We do recommend you open up the chat. In the chat pod is where you can get a link to the handouts, a direct link to the poll, so you don't have to type that in. I may ask you to raise your hands now and then just to get some information from you. And then the Q&A, that's where you can put in your questions. So please take advantage of that. Put your questions in. We certainly want to see that from you. Okay. Again, if you want the professional development hour, they're worthy in New York State for the person registered. If you're from another state, well, you need to check with your LTAP center. Just something to keep in mind. So welcome, and welcome to the session on traffic safety. Interestingly enough, let's see what technology does. I'm actually 2 hours to the west of y'all, over in Montana, for a few days doing some training out here. But it's one of those weird things we can do with computers. We're going to do in some polls to start to see who's in the room. Helps me out. And I'm going to have to go in here and clear the responses. I realized I did not clear this. I'm going to make you do this again. I apologize. I'm going to, once my computer lets me, make you do it again. So here we go. Try it again. Clear the responses. See who we have in the room. We have consultants. That's good. We have a couple of people who work for the weekend. We got some cities and villages, towns, counties. Okay, good. Good variety of folks. Like to see that. Okay. And if you can't access the poll, you can use the Q&A, and I see somebody put in Bill. Okay. Okay. And we'll make you do it again. Clear the responses. Okay, let's see what we have here. We have engineers. I would expect there are a lot of engineers. Yeah. We have some field We have the supervisors, board member, no board members today. If you put other in, type that into the uh, chat pod for me so I know what's going on there. Okay, so we have some highway superintendents. That's good. Okay, it's about what I expected, but never hurts to check. And then lastly, and again, I'm going to clear this. We'll see what the new people are. You can click on the map and tell me where you are. I'm not going to click where I am because it'll be hard for me to do that. Okay, we actually have somebody from Massachusetts. We got folks up and down the Thruway, North Country, about a bunch on Long Island. Oh, that's good. I like that. It's a good variety. Good to see. Okay, cool. And I'm going to, because I was told to, I'm going to go over here. Just give me a sec. I'm going to turn my video off temporarily just because with this weird technology, I'm lagging a little bit. I'd rather my voice be the thing you're responding to, not my video. Okay. So we're going to be talking about traffic safety today. And one of the things we're going to be pulling from is is Safer Roads and Streets. It's one of our workshop manuals, and a lot of the information in that is available. In fact, by the magic of mentioning these things, Jody and Amanda in the background will drop in the chat pod a link. So if you want to download the entire workbook, you're welcome to, or you can plan on going to one of the workshops that we'll be having. Okay. Now, we're going to be talking about accidents versus crashes today. We've changed that term a few years ago, but it's a good way to think about it, is that an accident is something a little one has. A crash is what occurs with vehicles. And the reason we do this is we really want to just focus first on trying to stop the crashes, and then we can worry about who's to blame, assign responsibility, things like that. And so that's what we really want to focus on more than anything else. Now, when we do this, one of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the probability the crash occurs. We're going to be looking at the severity of the crash, because we obviously want low severity. And finally, we want to limit exposure. Now, in terms of probability, how likely is a particular safety feature or safety thing on the roadway going to lead to a crash? So like, what's the probability people actually use this security gate? It looks like it's pretty low to me. So the idea here is look for places that are more likely to have problems, like sharp corners or a long straightaway, a curve that doesn't have proper super elevation. Things like that is where we want to focus our money and time. And we want to spend our money, we want to look at things with high severity. This is a picture out in Nevada. You've probably seen me show this before if you've been to many of our sessions. It's the luckiest man in the world. As soon as he gets out of the hospital, he needs to go to the casino and bet everything on whatever color he likes, red or black, because he could have had a really, really bad day. But it reminds us we really want to focus our efforts on the high severity situations. That's where we're going to get the most bang for the buck. And we also want to focus on the places that have the most particular case. The one on the right is certainly going to be the more severe situation, but the one on the left has 13,000 vehicles a day. So we probably actually want to think about that one first, because while it's not as severe, there's so much more exposure. And that's the balancing act that we're going to have to reach. And again, if you download the workbook on Safer Roads and Streets, you can get information there that might help you out a little bit. Okay, let me move something here. It's always fun when you're using one screen. You get used to having two and things like that. There we go. Okay, so what does traffic safety mean? Okay, I'm going to leave the ones that were here before, but put your own in. What does traffic safety mean? You can see people put in things like safety for pedestrians and motorists, trying to deal with clear zones. It's predictable. There's all kinds of things of what traffic safety can mean. And yeah, I like that one. Protect all users. And all users means people in cars, people who are walking, people who are in a bus, on a bicycle. And of course, we have to deal with e-scooters and things like that. Traffic safety actually means different things for different people. And so there's always that challenge, that balancing act that we have to deal with when it comes to traffic safety. And when I was in kindergarten, I was always taught 2 wrongs don't make a right. And yes, the person involved here was not killed. They did break their arm. Don't ask me how. But it's a classic kind of thing that we think about. Who's at fault? Well, let's first focus on trying to figure out ways to have this problem not occur again. But in this particular case, we had both a pedestrian walking against the signal, did say don't walk, and a vehicle who went through a red light, and the combination could have led very easily to a fatality. We're very fortunate that the person was only having a broken arm, but it's still a really bad day for a lot of people. So we really need to be thinking about that. And like it or not, we have way too many fatalities in the United States. Pre-COVID numbers, the data was in the 30,000 range, and coming out of COVID, we've been over 40,000 for the last couple of years, though there is some good news that we're starting to come back down a little bit, and we're getting less crashes and less fatalities, but still much higher than pre-COVID. So how do we reduce that? How do we get that number where we'd like it to be? We really would like it to be down towards 0, if at all possible. And in terms of where we want to put our focus, especially in rural parts of the country, we really want to focus on keeping people in their lane. If you look at it from a standpoint of the fatal crashes, roadway departures alone account for almost half the crashes, versus if you look at pedestrian and bicycle issues or intersection issues. But those are obviously pretty important as well. So those are the places we tend to focus: roadway departures, pedestrian bicycles because they're vulnerable users, and then finally, things that occur at intersections. So let's talk about that a little bit. Now, when I was in school, I learned the 4 E's. I'm going to talk about a different one later on and a different way to look at safety, but let's look at the 4 E's. The first one is education. You're here for education, so obviously, stand by. I'll blame it on the dry mountain there. The 4 E's, education's the first one. We need to educate not only ourselves, but the public, the motorist. There's a lot of education that could go on. We need to think about engineering. And engineering could include, obviously, making the road safer, but it also includes things like making sure we have proper clear zones. This is a nice, fancy-looking mailbox, but if you look at it carefully, you'll see that it's actually held up with angle iron. And if you were to hit that with your car, you would have yourself a really, really bad day. So we need to be thinking about making roads as safe as possible. And of course, we're going to need some enforcement. You can't get away without any enforcement, because if people know there's no enforcement, they tend to go faster, they tend to take a risk. That is some evidence of what happened during COVID. It's like, well, we know the cops aren't going to pull us over. There was actually a speeder caught on Broadway in Manhattan going over 130 miles an hour because they didn't think they were going to get caught. They did, but there was still a lot of speeding that's going on. And then finally, one of the most important things is emergency response. For those of you who are volunteer firemen or fire people, that's a very, very important role that you take, because if we can get people good medical care within an hour, they have a much better chance of survival. So that emergency response, having access to hospitals, is such a critical role, and we sometimes devalue that in terms of saving people's lives and helping get them to things. Now, in terms of crash factors themselves, look at a pie chart here. We have ourselves a pie, and we've plopped into the pie the common crash factors of, is it the highway, is it the human, or is it the vehicle? And so what we do is we sort of break that down, and you can see that about 59% of the time is really the human by themselves who's doing something. About a quarter of the time, it's the highway and the human together. Maybe the human's going a little too fast and the highway's got a little bit of slipperiness on it, or the outside corner's not great. So a lot of our crashes occur, especially the fatal ones, with this combination of things. Yes, the vehicle can make a difference. Yes, you can have some issues with the highway or even all of them. But what we need to focus on is what we can do with the highway and realize their human factors can be taken into account. Just because it says the human's primarily responsible doesn't mean we can't do something. In fact, there's a lot of things we can do. We just have to think about the fact, what are people doing when they're driving? How do we deal with those human factors? And can we make it where one crash doesn't lead to a fatality? So let's look at a couple of these things in more detail. We'll start with the vehicle. We're a long ways away from the Corvair and the Pinto and vehicles that are deadly in of themselves, though we still have issues. We still see them in the news. But This is a vehicle issue as well. There's nothing that could be done about somebody who's driving on a tire that's this bald. Wait for that thing to blow out or slipperiness on even a light rainy day. Yeah, we can't do much. This is why we're trying to do self-driving cars, though it has its own issues, a self-driving car. And we could spend a whole session talking about some of the issues with them. But the vehicle is something we have to think about. But luckily, it's not a high percentage. The human factors, yeah, it's huge. And the reason that it's huge is because people get expectations. They don't pay attention. They have vision and hearing and sense issues that they have to deal with. This is a cartoon that was done. And so you're laughing about the people looking at their cell phones, and you've all seen it. But, perception is reality. There are actually signs up that sort of say, hey, there are people around here who aren't paying attention. You might want to be careful of them. Should we be signing for that? We may have to. And that's, again, the perception being reality that we have to deal with. So in the Q&A, if somebody wants to tell me, what's the most important sign here? You had to pick one sign out of this series of signs in Lake Placid. What's the most important sign? Let's see what y'all say. Somebody's got it. Let's see. I'll see if two people can get it. Yep. Yep. Y'all got it. Very good. Yeah. The hospital sign. The hospital sign is actually supposed to be white on blue. In fact, that is the standard. And the problem is when you get so many signs like that, you can get confused. So really, we need to be thinking about not breaking people's expectations. And when we do that, we have a problem. So for instance, how many of you saw that it said school zone? If you said school zone, well, you were close. It's actually Shakul. So I guess it's the cool school. I don't know, but they got their C and their H mixed up. But when you first glance at it, you still see the word school as you're driving down. And that's okay. Um, People's expectations, we can actually take advantage of that. You can put up a red octagon with almost any words on it, and you know it means stop. Don't break people's expectations. So if people are used to things and there's something different, they're going to have an issue. And then, of course, we have to worry about people's attention. And we'll see how our awareness test does today. But let's see if you can count the number of passes that the team in white makes. Okay, so you get the 4 people in white, count the number of passes that they make. Okay, and stop. How many have you got? 13. 14, that's not bad. By the way, did you see the moonwalking bear? Watch carefully. Here in the middle, there is a moonwalking bear. See him? There's the bear. You'll never miss the bear again. Um, this is a known problem. People don't see things sometimes, even when they're there. So if you ride a motorcycle or you ride a bicycle, we know people tend to miss them. They literally don't see them because they're expecting a car. And it's paying attention, breaking people's expectations. You got to think about that. If you do have a motorcycle, those dual lights on the front actually tend to help. So don't break people's attention if you can avoid it. Okay? And of course, we have to worry about vision, poor vision, and sight vision, and things that are optical illusions, like this is not moving. I know it looks like it's moving, but it's not. If you want to convince yourself of that, look in the upper left, upper right, left, lower right corner, and you'll see the dots aren't moving at all. But again, what people can see. I know personally myself, twilight time is a much harder time for me to drive these days because my vision is changing as I've gotten, well, older. So think about these human factors when we talk about the highway. There's things we can do. There are things you can change. Now, obviously, we can deal with the geometry of the roadway. We can change traffic control. And these are issues that make a big difference to the roadway itself. And we have standards. The standards that everybody has heard about probably is the AASHTO Green Book. AASHTO stands for the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. Essentially, it's the state departments of transportation who got together and put a set of geometric standards. And the reason it's the Green Book is because they used to have a yellow book for rural areas and a blue book for urban areas. and decided to make one book out of it, and it became green. And since then, it's been called the Green Book. Now, if you're in New York State, there's a thing called the Highway Design Manual, which pulls extensively from the Green Book. If you've got a really low volume road, you may want to look at the AASHTO low volume standards. These are nice because they protect you in court, they reduce your liability, and they're also more realistic in a lot of ways for lower volume roads. But they go up to 2,000 vehicles a day, and that probably covers a lot of your road system. You could develop your own local ones, but remember, if you're doing that, you really want to have something that has some basis behind it, can be supported. We actually have a set of standards that we support that we have on our website, and it's in the handout, by the way, so you can just link to it. You don't have to memorize anything. Those geometric standards will give consistency and, again, not break people's expectations. They're used to certain things on a roadway, and we want to build roads to not break those expectations. Now, when we design and pave for roadways, we break them into functional classifications. This is a functional classification map of the city of Ithaca, and you can actually go online and find a functional classification for your particular area. It's pretty easy. We have principal arterials. These are the main roads that go in. We have minor arterials. Those are the roads that are also most likely state highways, but a lot of county roads as well. We're going to have collectors. In rural areas, that tends to be the county road system. Within an urban area, these would be the roads that go from the local communities back to those arterials. And then you're going to have your local roads. Most of us live on a local road. In fact, truth be told, even if we live on an arterial, we treat it as a local road. This actually leads to some safety problems because when you've got different functional classifications, people drive in different ways. The interstate system is obviously a principal arterial, and yet it's very safe. It's high speed. And the reason is because it's only people who are going high speed. And there's not these conflicts that you get of mixed classification. So that can lead to some issues to think about. Also, when you're thinking about your local system, you may have some really very low volume roads under 400 vehicles a day. If you've got roads like that, you may even treat them different, especially in terms of risk, because the exposure is so small. Now, in terms of the functional classification volumes and amount of links, obviously the traffic volume on the arterial systems is huge. You add up all the volumes, depending where you are, they can range from 40 to 80% of your mileage. And so only 10-15% of your roads carry most of the traffic. The local road system is half or more of the volume, and yet it's only carrying a small, maybe half or more of the length, but only carrying a small volume. So we have to manage that system and think about safety with limited funds. So that creates some issues for us that we have to think about. So let's do that. Now, one of the biggest conflict points we've got are intersections. People coming into an intersection don't always know what to do. So when you look at your intersections, think about what are the expectations. Think about what people might expect. And if you're looking to change something, like try a mini roundabout like this one here in the city of Ithaca, or putting in a big roundabout in a rural area, think what people are used to. A lot of people say, oh, I hate roundabouts, until they get used to them, and then they're fine with them. But the problem is people have expectations, and roundabouts tend to break those expectations. But the thing is true with an intersection. You expect to come in and look left, look right, look left again, and go. And then you expect the road to be at 90 degrees. And if it's off by even just a little bit at askew, you're breaking people's expectations. So as you're thinking about these things, find some samples, drive through them, see what you think. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of good ideas out there. We want to make sure our roads are properly super elevated. Because if you're going on a roadway and it's not super elevated properly, that means the crown on the outside lane has actually been brought up, so you can go around like a racetrack. Then you're going to cause expectations to be broken. Now, you can't go too much because of snow and ice, but the idea is work with what people's expectations are. And of course, when you get weird intersections and you get weird super elevations, this is what leads to crashes. So this is a very interesting intersection near the Cornell campus where you've got essentially 3 roads and a supersized Y. And all the time, there's pedestrians walking through it. What do people expect? And so if we break people's expectations, we shouldn't be surprised that there are conflicts. Now, in terms of vertical alignments, we have to be careful that we don't get too steep. This particular grade here is 18%. Very, very difficult to maintain. We'd really much rather have a flatter arrangement. And of course, we also have to think about when there's a horizontal and vertical alignment mixed, because the road's going down and it's turning. This one's going to the left, which isn't so bad for most drivers, but actually going to the right, it's hard for people to get a sense of what they're going to see. So as you're driving the roadway, think about what people's expectations are. A road may meet the standards, but still have some issues on it. If you're not sure, go get some help. There's lots of help available. We'd be glad to help you out. Talk to your local state agency, the counties. There's lots of ways to look at these things. Now, one of the most important criterion we deal with when it comes to traffic safety is stopping sight distance, i.e. the time it takes from the time you see something until you can actually stop. And if we can design the road so people have that, we improve safety quite a bit. The concept is the height of the eye is a person in their car seating, and they're about 3.5 feet above the pavement, and they don't want to hit an object that's 2 feet, which is maybe the back end bumper, a really large rock, something like that. And the idea is you want to be able to stop before you hit it. Okay? Let's go back here. And so if it's too short of a distance, then people aren't as safe. They don't have time to react. Now, in terms of what speeds we got to deal with, well, that's where we got to be careful, because if we do what we've always done, we'll get where we've always gotten, and we know speeds are going up. So how do we improve safety in this particular case? Well, we can go back to our 4 E's. We may have to educate the public with roundabouts. We may have to put in better standards for mailboxes and say people, yeah, I know you have a nice aesthetic mailbox, but is it really that critical? We have to think about putting in some enforcement. Some self-enforcement can actually help, surprisingly, because again, if you don't break people's expectations, they'll tend to drive at the speed you designed the road to. And of course, we can think about getting our emergency response in good shape. So let's go through and think about these things. Now, one of the things is, even if you have standards, do me a favor. The standards are not, this is important, the standards are not what we have to do. The standards are just minimums. If we've got to think about risk, let's just take, for instance, the stopping sight distance we just talked about. And let's say the stopping sight distance is 495 feet, which is sort of the typical value for stopping sight distance for 55 miles an hour, just under 500 feet. The crash risk, if I suddenly can increase the stopping sight distance from 480 to 505, so I cross over that magic threshold, doesn't go from really high to really low. That's not the way it works. What you're doing is you're improving things a little bit. When we set standards, what we're doing is we're saying, well, we want the risk to be low, but we can't do the risk zero. So we're going to lower the risk by having a standard. But if you can go more than the standard, go for it. If you can't meet the standard, but you can improve things, go for that as well. So for instance, most design standards want a minimum 10-foot, but prefer 11-foot lanes. Well, let's say you can't get an 11-foot lane, but I can get 10 feet 6. Well, you've improved safety. You don't have to feel like, oh man, I can't get that, I'm gonna do nothing. Doing nothing is the one thing we don't want to do. Think about small improvements. Do what you can with what you got, where you are, because we all know there's limited budgets, limited time, and we are really trying to make things safe as we can for everybody involved. Now, the Federal Highway Administration, it's been about 3 years now, just after COVID hit, so pretty interesting. They came up with this concept called the Safe Systems approach. Now, it comes from some work out of Switzerland, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But the idea is, rather than having the individual 4 E's, which tend to get siloed, we're going to have 5 things we look at. And we're going to say we don't want them to be stuck in their little area. We really want to mix them together. So when we think about safe road users, we also think about how they work with their vehicles. We think about how users deal with speed. We think about the roads themselves and how people live with their expectations, and how do we get post-crash or emergency response. Okay, so when it comes to that concept, one way to think about it is think about pedestrians. And I said earlier, they're vulnerable users. If I've got a vehicle going along at 23 miles an hour and it hits a pedestrian, the chances that that pedestrian is going to have an injury or get killed is about 33%. It's about a third. Okay? And it's the K and the IA. And if you're wondering, K stands for killed, and IA means serious injury, life-changing kind of injuries. Broken arm that we saw earlier would not be considered life-changing. So 2/3 of the time they may get an injury, but it's the kind of thing that's short-term, they'll recover, they should be okay. But if you just go up to 42 miles an hour, the chances of getting killed actually go up to slightly over 50%. The chances of a serious injury are pretty high as well. The chances of walking away with minor injury or no injury at all drops down under 20%. It's starting to get really slow. And by the time you get to 55 or 58 is what the research had, the chances that you're going to walk away, almost nothing. So we really need to be thinking about how do we get people to slow down when there are vulnerable users, when there are people on bicycles, when there are people who could get struck. And we have to think about what people's expectations are. We don't want to break those expectations because they're not going to slow down if we do. So the safe systems approach combines all of these together, and they do that where they essentially take education for the users themselves. We think about the safe vehicles and the safe roads. We have to think about those in a combined way. Yes, these all of the 4E's are still there. We still have all those same things, but rather than doing them individually, we bring them all together. And this is the idea I said it comes from Switzerland. It's the idea of Swiss cheese, not the idea of safety, though it was a Swiss guy who was one of the people involved with it. Maybe he was eating a sandwich, I don't know. But the idea is if you take all of these things together, hopefully there's enough redundancy that we don't get the crash. So if you think about it, if somebody was driving down the road and the road had a super elevation problem, and the vehicle itself had a bit of a bald tire, then we might think to ourselves, oh, well, they're okay, but if the driver's driving too fast, that could be a problem. But now we come along and, oh, well, yes, but there's good friction on the roadway, so the person doesn't have a problem. The idea is redundancy, so one mistake doesn't lead to a fatality. And that's actually a pretty cool idea. And if you think about most crashes that you've come across, it wasn't one thing. It was multiple things that occurred. The person was drunk, and it was raining. The person was in a vehicle that had a tire blowout, and there was a tree along the side of the road that they couldn't avoid. It's a combination of things. So we want to try to set it up so that one mistake doesn't lead to a serious crash that leads to a fatality or serious injury. So going back to those crash factors, a lot of people say, well, you know, the humans are 60% of the problem. I can't really do much beyond what I can deal with on the highway. Actually, there's a lot you can do because those numbers with the highway are only talking about situations where the roadway didn't meet the standard or where the roadway was the proximate cause. There are things we can do above and beyond, or little things we can do to not break people's expectations and improve some safety issues. Okay, so I'm going to clear last set of things. What can you do about human factors? What can you do right now? What are things on highway safety or traffic safety that we can do that improve safety that are really focused on the human factor? Give me some ideas of things you could think of that you might be able to do to help people out. Let's see what you come up with. Okay, somebody put in the Q&A, signage, and then somebody put in the Zoom, in the poll, consistency in signage. Absolutely. One of the reasons it's called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices is the word uniform. Consistency really helps. Yeah. High visibility striping, education, okay? Signage is one of the most important things. Some education in the schools. Maybe we need to even think about how we test our drivers. Yeah. And how we train them. We need to get people into good habits. How many of us just automatically put on a seatbelt? We know that is a major improvement in terms of survivability, and yet we still know people who don't. Reduce visual clutter. Yep, that can help quite a bit. Okay? Let's see if we can get one or two more here. And then we'll move on. A lot of you have focused on signs and driver education, but some of the new vehicle safety features, if they're done well, could help. I understand some people are concerned with them, but then maybe we need to educate them a little bit. Maybe we think about enforcement, but in a realistic way. So there's things we might be able to do with things like that. And again, there's always a different idea that are out there. Okay, so we'll move on. And I'm going to give you some ideas. We're going to spend about 20 minutes or so here. We're going to go through some ideas and think about, when we talk about these ideas, which ones are related to vehicles, which ones are related to human factors, and which ones related to the roadway itself. Okay? So one of the things we're thinking about with stopping sight distance, and again, this is a long-term solution, is we've got this distance we deal with. What we've started realizing is, cell phones or no, people actually do need a little bit more distance if they're in places with a lot of distractions. So we've added something called the decision sight distance. We've increased the reaction time a little bit. The normal reaction time we assume for most people is 1.5 to 2 seconds. We actually design for 2.5 seconds of decision time. But what we found is we need to increase that a little bit, especially in urban areas where there's a lot of distractions. We can't always get rid of the distractions, but maybe we can increase the expected distances, the timing on our lights, the locations of our signs, dealing with the fact that it may take people a little bit longer to make their decisions in terms of what they're doing. Even in a rural area, an additional 5 or 10 feet can make a big difference in a sign. So when you're putting a sign up, maybe you move it back a little bit, put it around the corner, put a secondary sign on the left side of the road. Think about what we can do to give people time to react and slow down. One of the really important reasons we put good work zone signage up, because helps people improve their decision sight time and their sight distance that they have to have. Now, somebody put into the list of things we can do, putting in stripes. Well, let's just look at what stripes do. This is a straightaway. No safety issues at all on a long straightaway, right? Well, probably not most of the time, but on a cloudy or foggy day, adding even a simple center line in can make a huge difference in terms of seeing that roadway. And if putting an edge line in, even better. So lines are one thing we can really think about improving. Though I will admit, once you put the lines up, you have to be able to maintain them. You're going to have to budget for that. Okay? And somebody put into the Q&A, is the aging population being taken into consideration? Absolutely. They're listed in that list of vulnerable users, because especially as pedestrians, they tend to take longer to cross the roadway. And part of the thing we're trying to do is think about these realistic human factors. One of the things recommended, for instance, for stripes, as an example, is we use 4-inch stripes. We found 6-inch stripes actually help improve the visibility of the lines and reduce the number of crashes by quite a bit. And part of the reason they help is people who are getting older and have sight issues, like, I'm getting older at night. It's harder to see. It can really help. So yes, the vulnerable populations we deal with, the young, the old, people have various disabilities that might have a harder time crossing the street, people that have a harder time driving and seeing, but they're out there, so we have to deal with that reality. So yeah, that's an important thing. As you're thinking about your improvements, think about rolling dice. We've got a term called systemic safety. We tend to want to just wait for a problem to occur and fix it. That can lead to problems. We really need to be thinking more about the entire system. Okay, so here's a map. This is from 2012 to 2014, Southern Tier fatal crashes, and you could run this map and you won't see much difference from year to year. You'll see crashes occurring. So I'm going to put the crashes up, and let me see if with my little mouse broken, if this works. Yay, it worked. I want you to look at the dots, okay? Where do you think you should put your money? You got a limited pot of money. I can fix 2 or 3 problems a year. Where am I going to spend my money? Okay. What do you think? Should I put it up there near Ithaca? There's a bunch of purple and red dots, or maybe down towards Binghamton where there's a bunch of yellow, 2013, 2014. The problem is, for especially fatal crashes, they aren't occurring that close to each other. One individual crash might occur, but they're actually further apart than you think. None of these dots are within a half a mile of each other. Most of them are further apart than that. They're not the same intersection. They're not the same roadway. They're random in a lot of ways. So what we really need to be thinking about is looking for those commonalities that we're seeing. So looking at roadway departures as an example, hitting fixed objects is about 41% of the fatal crashes, okay? And of those, of course, trees are a big issue. People going into the opposing lane, that's a major issue. About a quarter of the fatalities, and then about a quarter of the time they overturn, roll into a deep ditch, and or didn't have their seatbelt on when they overturned. So what can we do? Well, we can think about removing fixed objects, especially trees. We can think about maybe using rumble strips in the places where it's going to help. Maybe not 100%, but maybe in certain locations. And thinking about shallowing our ditches up and educating people to put their seatbelts on. All of these things might help, but we don't wait for that to occur. We do it systematically. Okay? So these are all things we can think about to improve safety. Focus on where the problems are occurring. And yes, as we said, people are driving faster, as you noted in the Q&A. So because of that, we have to think maybe about improving sight distances, making the clear zones just a little bit wider. And we have to educate people about the fact that you got to slow down. And if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to fight this problem. Now, in terms of the most dangerous fixed object, you probably already knew the answer to this. The answer is trees. By far, trees are the single most deadly fixed object. I'm not telling you, by the way, to go cut down every tree. In fact, trees are actually valuable for other reasons. So it's not the trees that are the problem. It's trees that are unexpected, that break people's expectations. If you're driving in a national forest, there's lots of national forest out here in Montana, there's trees right next to the roadway, but you expect that. So you drive differently because of that. If you know the trees are out there at a certain distance, good. It's not going to break people's expectations. Don't break those and you'll be better off. And why are trees so deadly, by the way? Well, they're deadly because when they get struck, they behave in such a way that they're the worst case scenario of ductile and rigid. So you can see here, this is a simulated test at 30, 43, and 55 miles an hour. And the chances of walking away from even the 43 is pretty slim. The 55, you're probably going to be killed. So really, you do not want to be hitting trees at a high speed. So we need to be thinking about getting the trees away from the roadway, especially in the clear zone. And we need to have a consistent clear zone. And for those who go, well, I'm in an urban area, it's not an issue. You'll actually see, yes, 2/3 of the fatal crashes occur with trees in rural areas, but that means 1/3 occur in urban areas because that's all they break them down is urban and rural. So speed can make a difference, but again, high posted speed and low posted speeds aren't that different. By the way, that's what the posted speeds, one is 55 and one is less than 55. It doesn't make much of a difference. Hitting a tree is not a good day. So again, here's a whole bunch of responses. Let's see, can you come up with some new ideas for tree safety? Last time we asked people this, they said just remove them, improve your clear zone. What else can we do about tree safety? Got any new ideas? I'm always looking for new ideas. Grind all the stumps all the way down. Yep. Trim the trees. That actually can be a very good one. That's actually a really good one. Improve sight distance. Yep. Any other ideas? Check them yearly. That's a good idea. A colorful sign notice. Well, maybe. I like removing the dangerous ones. That's a really good idea. Look for the ones on the outside of corners. Look for the ones that are more likely to be struck because of their location. It's hard to do advanced warning, but yeah, identify those that are inconsistent close to the roadway. You could think about rail, but remember rail in of itself is dangerous, and you have the deflection distance behind the rail to deal with. But yes, you definitely have a policy for inspection and removal, and you want to make sure you have a consistent clear zone or right of way if you can. So yeah, all great ideas. Okay. Now, what is the clear zone? Well, the clear zone is the distance from the edge of the traveled way, the pavement, the white line, if you have a white line, till the first thing that could cause a serious crash. That could be a deep ditch, it could be a body of water, or in this particular case, it could be trees. Now, there are people who will argue we need 30-foot clear zones. Well, that comes from some tests with the General Motors Corporation at their test track. I'm not an advocate for a 30-foot clear zone. I don't think I want to drive on rural roadways if there's nothing within 30 feet. But we do want to have a consistent clear zone. So things that get in your clear zone, cut them down before they get bigger. And how big a clear zone do you need? Well, surprisingly smaller than you might think. But consistency matters. Now, this is what they guessed last time. Let's see if you guys can do better and tell me, where's the edge of the clear zone here? They marked it all over the map. And let's see here. You're picking faster than I can take them out. It's not clearing for me. Oh, well. Well, we're getting all kinds of dots all over the place. Let's just see here one last time. Did it work? Yay, it worked. Okay, let's try again. Tell me where the clear zone edge is here. Okay, some of you have put the edge of the shoulder. Some of you have put the utility pole. Some of you have put the sign in the back. Think about a vehicle going down the roadway. That shoulder is still in the clear zone. Even going off a little bit, still in the clear zone. But that utility pole, that is not in the clear zone. If you go off the road, you're going to hit that. In fact, that utility pole is in probably the worst possible place it could be, the bottom of the ditch. Because if a vehicle does go off the road, what do you think is going to happen when they get to that ditch? They may not go back up the other side. And so they're going to keep going down the ditch. My first boss out of college, before he worked for Yates County, was in construction. And one night he fell asleep, drove off into the road into the ditch, and hit a utility pole enough to cut the car almost in half. Luckily, the half that hit the utility pole was not where he was sitting, and he actually walked away. So you want to make sure you have a good, consistent clear zone. Okay? So right here, am I going to go left or am I going to go right? Just ask yourself. Your tire blows out and you can control the car. There's no traffic coming, so I can go left or I can go right. Which way are you going to go? If you chose left, you're going to have yourself a really bad day. The right actually looks a little bit riskier with the ditch, and yet it's the left where the risk is because the trees are still there. So grind those stumps down. Again, don't break people's expectations. That's what's going to lead you to all kinds of problems that you can have. Okay? So keep that in mind. Look carefully about what you've got in terms of safety. If you're putting signs up, make every sign breakaway. It actually turns out to be relatively cheap, especially in rural areas. You can do some simple things. This is what happens when a small car hits just a small 3-inch post that isn't breakaway. Really doesn't take much. You don't have to get the big fancy things like you see here with these tests. It can be a pretty simple, just a bolted system. They make ones that are literally under $1 to do connectors. And the nice thing about those systems, like this is a nice simple one that's just done with simple bolts, is you can put in your ground post and use these special adapters to go to the post up above ground as well. Now, in a rural area, I don't like the ones that fly like this. They cost more, a little bit more for ones in urban areas that snap the sign down, that connect it together, but make the signs breakaway. It's not only a requirement, it's a good idea. Repair your edge drop-offs, especially in the inside of your corners, and maybe widen the inside of your corners out. It's actually in the standards, but we don't do it much. But think about when you're driving a trailer down the roadway. That trailer behind you doesn't track right behind you. It tends to go off on behind you. And if you go around the corner, you create that rut. Well, that's a major safety issue. It's one of the most dangerous things we can have on a roadway. So think about repairing those. And if you can, think about using something like a safety edge as part of your paving operation. I actually am a big fan of the safety edge because if you do that, you get this angle that people can actually drive up and down, and it protects the edge of the pavement till you get your shoulders backed up. If you're interested in that, by the way, I'm going to shout out to Andy Avery down in Chemung County. Give him a call. It's actually in their standards. Every time they pave, they use a safety edge. It does both safety improvement and improves the edge of the roadway. So it's like the old Saturday Night Live floor wax and dessert topping. It can do two things at the same time. Make sure you use rail properly. And rail has to have both deflection distance and the proper end on it. We don't want to have a spearing end because it literally can cut right into a vehicle at high speed. Okay? So think about things like that. Whoop, went too far. So think about, what does rail do? What doesn't rail do? These are all very important things that we have to think about. Because if you don't, you could lead yourself into kinds of problems that you don't want to have to deal with later on. Now, we could have a lot more different ideas out there that we could deal with, and we could spend a whole time. We have a whole class, the whole day on safer roads and systems. But again, I just wanted to give you a brief thinking about things. So let's see. And in this case, you've already seen the answer, but I'll go ahead and clear it anyway. What's the name of the new FHWA approach for improving safety? Yep, you read the screen ahead of time. Safe systems. And the idea here is really think about not just having education, not just engineering, not just enforcement. Really combine all of these things together. It's a system, okay? So that means that getting people to slow down is important, but we can't just do that with engineering. We can't just do that with enforcement. We really have to do some education as well. And we may even have to put some things in some vehicles. People don't like that. I even know why they don't like it. I can even appreciate that. But what is our goal? How do we do these things? And we need to do them together. Okay. Now may have heard the term Vision Zero. It's related. Vision Zero, the concept is to get down to have zero fatalities within a particular community. That should be our goal. Do I think we'll get there? Personally, no. I don't think we'll get to zero fatalities. But I do think that's the goal we should have. Because if we don't think about that, we're willing to accept a certain number of crashes. Are you willing to accept a certain number of fatalities in your own family due to crashes? I hope not. So really, we need to be thinking about doing better if we can. Okay? So we can do nothing about the crashes that are mostly human factors. Well, of course it's false. That's good. Okay? And we can do things beyond highway geometry. So as an example, let's look at one where it's not going to be listed as a highway problem. It's going to be a human factors problem. That one with the tree stumps. Surprisingly, that might probably get coded as not a highway problem if the tree was far enough off the roadway. And yet, you and I both know if we cut that tree down, we've been better off. Okay? So think about little things like that. So just because a corner has a proper super elevation, maybe we widen it out a little bit and make it a little bit safer. Maybe we improve the sight distance at an intersection. We can go above and beyond the standards. We can look at nominal safety, yes, but really we want to be substantive. Think about little things you can do. And again, don't break people's expectations. If you do, you're going to leave yourself into troubles. Okay? And then the most deadly fixed object, again, you've already beat me to the punch, is trees. Yep. But realize all of these things can be an issue. Utility poles can be an issue. Don't let utility poles get put in the worst possible locations. A lot of times you see them in the ditch line. You see them too close to the roadway. Don't break people's expectations. And when you're looking at all of these things, think about the volumes of traffic. Where are you going to focus your money? One of the things I like to recommend to anybody is take a map, start writing down where all your crashes are occurring. And by the way, you can get these data as well through a system called CLEAR. Don't ask me what CLEAR stands for. I know it stands for crash location. And the rest of it, I think the last R is repository. You can get it through your planning department, your MPO, if you're an MPO has access. You can download and see where all the crashes are occurring, and then start looking at the common factors. Where do you see a lot of crashes? Is it sharp corners? Is it intersections? Are people hitting trees? And then start thinking about fixing those problems in such a way that you slowly improve the crash safety. Okay? And then what does traffic safety mean? We got some answers already here, limiting damage, safe roadways. But what does traffic safety? Let's add some more ones. See what else you got. Reduce fatalities. Yeah, drivers' expectations met. Surprisingly good. If you've have heard the term traffic calming or complete streets, The idea behind these is to be consistent. It's the road version of what's sometimes called universal design in housing. If you think about what's good for somebody who has a mobility issue, it's also pretty good for you and I. And it also is pretty good for your parents when they get older. And the same is true in a roadway. Consistency for somebody who's vulnerable also helps someone who's not. So traffic safety really means thinking about everybody. Consistency, predictable, don't break people's expectations. And yeah, I like that one, protecting all users. Okay. Now, in terms of our foundational webinars, we're done with the one today. All of our webinars are online. You can go back and watch them. You're welcome to do so. Okay. Next week, we got Complete Streets. We'll be taking a break around the holidays. Then we're going to be starting up with departmental duties. Really useful for those who are brand new. We know there's a bunch of new folks starting on January 1st, so talk to your friends and neighbors and get them in. We're going to be then doing street and legal issues after that, worker safety, culverts, and then finally, one that I think might be of interest to a lot of people, finding, retaining, and motivating employees, because we know long-term workforce development is going to be an issue that we have to deal with. Okay. So if you've got any questions, we got a couple of minutes. You can throw them in the Q&A pod, and we'll try to answer your question. We can bring that full workshop, by the way, on the solution for safer roads to you, or better yet, you can download the manual, read through it, and ask us a question. Be glad to help, because our goal at the end of the day is the same goal everybody has, and that's to get everybody home every single day in a safe way. Okay? Let's see if we got any questions, Amanda. I don't see any.
I don't see any either.
I don't see any either. Well, great. Well, everybody have yourself a great time. I'm signing off from here in Mountain Time, and we'll catch up with you next week on Complete Streets. And you can go to our website to register, by the way. For anything, just go to our website, NYSLTAP-CLRP. You can go just search Google. That's the easiest way to find us these days. Just search for NYSLTAP. It'll pop right up. And then Amanda, you can also click to our website and go from there. Register for any of our workshops. And if you're not on our email list, make sure you get on the email list. We'll keep adding things to it. Okay, with that, Amanda and Jody, thanks for the help in the background, and we'll catch up with everybody later. Bye-bye.